This is another question that came in from Scott here on Slack. He said, how do you handle possible weather issues in MLB? I got burned on the Minnesota-Seattle game over the weekend. SaberSim was very high on Minnesota, and I had a number of stacks. At what point do you fade teams with a possible weather issue? Yeah, this is tough. I'm going to be honest. Scott, I did. So we had a similar day earlier in the baseball season where when I got on live for the show, there were like 6 of the 14 games on the slate all had pretty serious weather concerns. So I've talked about this before. I'm going to talk about it again here today about some of my strategies. But when I hop off of this show, I'll link you to a timestamp recording of this session I'm doing today here, just so you've got it. But also the last time I talked about this, I think we didn't have so many other questions that day, so I ended up spending almost like 45 minutes most of the show talking through weather strategies overall. So I will link you to that too. There's a lot of information there. I will kind of summarize some of the same points I talked about in that show. Let me pull this up here. And I'm going to start just right here. We've got this. Let's see. Okay. Yep, we're still good. Okay, so we've got this. I'm going to pull this down so that you guys can actually see here. This is Kevin Roth's weather dashboard here. It's for free over on Roto Grinders. It's pinned to our MLB channel in Slack. This is a great research tool. It's the first thing I open every single day when I open up my MLB sites to start doing some research. I think this is probably some of the most accurate baseball weather news all consolidated into one place that gives you an idea of kind of what to look out for that day. He uses this color coding system of indicating where risk is and then provides a little bit of a summary overall of the game. I would say at this point, red is obvious. Red, he'll use red when a game is actually delayed. The difficulty comes in a lot on these games that are in the orange area, either straight up orange, orange yellow, or even yellow orange. Those are games that present some kind of postponement risk. There is not really a magic answer in terms of predicting the weather outcome of those games over a long term, right? It's incredibly hard to predict. So I would say a few things that we can do as DFS players to affect our strategy is one, to simply stay very tuned in to the weather updates throughout the day, right? Weather changes pretty dramatically. Games that had apparently bad weather situations, even in the early afternoon, sometimes become a lot better throughout the day, and vice versa. Also after into lock, right? One of the most powerful tools that SaberSim has to offer is the late swap tool. Games that are in the slate but do not start at lock, that you are going into lock with weather concerns, are often very underowned because people either don't have the time or the interest or the tools to bother sitting around and late swapping. If you're going to play slates where there are weather concerns going into the slate, take advantage of the late swap tool. And I am typically leaning more on the side of rostering those players at lock to make adjustments if I need to at the time that game starts, right? We can roster Minnesota at Chicago players going into lock. I don't believe this game is at the start of the slate. And adjust accordingly. Yeah, so you have an extra hour here, and adjust accordingly if the weather picture seems to get worse, or if there's certain indicators that the team is giving that they're going to play or not, right? Some of those indicators, and Kevin Roth will tweet about this thing too, these things too, and kind of give you more information as the slate goes along. But if the tarp is on the field, that is often not as much of a good indicator. If the tarp comes off the field, that generally indicates that the team is willing to play. Sometimes the team's social media accounts themselves, they will actually tweet out that we intend to play this game. That happens sometimes. That is often a very good indicator that they're going to play. There are certain ballparks that are better or worse over the long term at playing these weather games, right? I think Danny Steinberg, a couple weeks ago, there was a weather concern game in Washington, and he ended up pinging the channel and mentioning like, hey, Washington has a bad history of playing weather games. They cancel games for weather pretty easily, and I think they went on to postpone that game. So there are indicators that we can use on social media in our Slack channel, and just with what the teams themselves are actually doing, to get a little bit of a better read on maybe what might happen. That, in conjunction with taking advantage of our late swap tool, can help add a little bit of extra edge there. I think in general, I think it was Kevin Roth that actually did a little bit of an analysis of this. I can't remember. I may need to go dig up where I found this. But games don't get postponed as often as I think is the conventional wisdom. Or I guess let me put it another way, in a way that's more practical for DFS. Games do not get as postponed as often as the ownership of weather concerning games would indicate to you. More often than not, they play the games. There's definitely a little bit of a cognitive bias there, where it feels so bad when you when you play a lineup with players that end up getting postponed in your lineup, that you definitely remember it. There's a loss aversion component there that you don't really want that to happen. But my personal strategy is I am fairly aggressive with weather games going into lock, unless I'm seeing some kind of indicator, like I mentioned before. Back to this weekend, I think the slate that you're actually talking about, let me pull this back up so people that are just joining know what I'm talking about. This Minnesota game, I think it was actually Minnesota Indians and Seattle White Sox, right? Or Twins Indians and Mariners White Sox, that were the two weather games. That Minnesota Indians game, they postponed, or they delayed that game before it even started raining. And Roth hopped on Twitter and he said something like, this is a bad indicator, right? They haven't even started the game. It hasn't started raining yet. That's not a very good sign for their willingness to play this game overall. And that's the one that got postponed. I faded the White Sox and Mariners game as well. That game actually did go on to play for a little bit and then was later suspended. So a little bit of a mixed bag there. I think effectively a postponed game in terms of DK scoring. But so we can look at those. I lost my train of thought here a little bit. I guess the last thing I'll note is when we're really kind of diving in, I'll pull up my my build one more time. I talk about this particular component more in detail in the last video, so I don't want to just summarize it completely here. Again, I will link you, Scott, to that conversation or to anybody else in the Office Hours channel as soon as I hop off here. One other thing that I will do, if there's a game that I am overall concerned about the weather on, and I'm leaving those players in my lineups, but I'm really feeling kind of 50-50 about it, is, first of all, it can be a good idea to just look at how much you are using those teams, which it doesn't seem like we are very much at all here. Let's bump this up just to see if I can start getting a little more of those guys in my lineups here. Let's look at 100. Okay, so we're not getting any of the stacks. Maybe we're getting the pitchers. Okay, yeah, so it's Giolito on the mound and Kenta Maeda. Those are both going to be pretty popular pitchers tonight. So I guess what the point I'm trying to make here is one thing I will do is I will eliminate one-off batters and small stacks of teams playing in weather games to basically take a stand on the game and capitalize on the upside outcome of that game, right? If that game has a median outcome on the hitting side and it plays and the score is like 6-4, and there's a few guys that had good fantasy performances, but not necessarily anyone that you need to win, that game outcome doesn't really help you in finding that tournament winning lineup. The upside potential of the game in the weather situation is really that one of the stacks goes off and is the stack. And you can still capitalize on that upside potential by allowing 5 stacks of that team into your builds, or by allowing 5 stacks of that team into your builds without allowing one-offs and 2-piece minor stacks to go in and potentially ruin other lineups where maybe those players weren't really needed. So that's one thing on the more practical side of actually what you can do here can look like, right? We still capitalize on the potential that game is the one you need to be in without sacrificing other lineups that maybe didn't need one-off players from that game. With pitchers, so it looks like we actually really want to use the pitchers from this game. I will typically, you can't really do that as much with pitchers. You kind of need to take a binary stand one way or the other. I am typically willing to at least roster a lot of these guys going into lock, assuming their game isn't the first one on the slate. Stay attuned to it and roll with it. Poor weather is often also pitching weather. So that's the other reason I'm willing to, in general, take pitchers into weather games where maybe I don't want one-off hitters. Pitchers, when it's cold and a little wet and maybe a little windy, a lot of times that stands to benefit the pitchers a little more, which is something also that the model can take into account. Here, Logan, real quick, asked a question: how would you limit the one-offs? Let's just use an example here, so I'll show you exactly how I do that. So let's pick a team that we do want to stack a lot of. I'm going to actually drop this back down to 20 just to show you an example here. So let's see. It does look like a popular team that we want to stack is maybe Washington, right? Let's say Washington, for example, had weather concerns for today. So we clearly have some 5 stacks of that team, right? We probably have some 4 stacks too, some 3 stacks. We have quite a bit of Washington. So what you can do is, just as a starting point, just eliminate the small piece stacks of that team. And we'll say, okay, I'm only going to use them in big 4-piece and 5-piece stacks. We have one lineup that is a 4-piece, one lineup that is a 5-piece. And then if you go back over to your players, look at your batters, and look at your teams, there's not really a great way to do this with total precision, especially if you're doing this for a lot of lineups. But we know that we have one. Well, let me double check that one more time. We have one Washington 5-stack and one Washington 4-stack. So 10% of our lineups have them in a stack. So any Washington batters that are exposed more than 10% are being used in one-offs, right? So now we know that. So we can come in and limit Schwarber and bring him down to 10. And now you can see here we've got just 5 Washington batters. We have Schwarber in 2 lineups. Actually, I think what that did probably is it removed our 5-stack. So now we've got one Washington 4-stack. So maybe we just go ahead and bring him down to 5. And what did it do now? I guess, so what I'm trying to do here is you kind of have a little bit of a back and forth between like looking at the players and looking at the stacks. And what you can see here is happening is that the builder is holding on very tightly to this top Schwarber lineup here that it really wants to use. And I think in effect, it ended up eliminating our big Washington stacks and keeping these players as one-off. So at this point, I might just cross them off and just get rid of these players. And now we're just not going to have any Washington. Let me see if I can try this again with another team, because that ended up being a little bit of a confusing example. So let's look at, I guess we'll do the Mets side of it, right? They're playing in the same game. So we're doing the same thing. So we might remove some of those smaller piece stacks to start. So we have a 10% of our lineups are in Mets 4 stacks and 5% are in 5 stacks, right? So we have 15% stack exposure to the Mets. And then if we look, okay, so no player is exposed more than 15%, right? So even if someone like McNeil is used in 15% of our lineups, wait, why did it do that? Let's see, why did it do that? Okay, that's not working right. I'll follow up on that. But let's go ahead. I guess the point I'm making here is that, right, our only exposure to the Mets now here are in the form of these big 5 stacks. 15% of our lineups have Mets stacks. We're not exposed to any one Mets player more than 15% of the time, so we know that we probably don't have any one-offs. And again, you can be a little bit more precise if you really want to dive in and take a look. I don't know if that math, the way I described it, is exactly correct, but I think it is, and that's the way I typically do that. And that's really just for games that I am like really 50-50 on. I'm really not feeling confident for one way or the other, especially where it comes in and is a little bit slate dependent is like if Washington and New York was a weather concern game today, right? The builder clearly wants to use those 2 teams. You're sacrificing a fair bit. But by giving them up. Maybe that's the best way to go about that. If a game like, I don't know, some game with some middle outcomes, if this Arizona-St. Louis game had some weather concerns, maybe those are teams that the builder doesn't even really want to use that much. And you can just cross it off a little easier. I guess with that said, I'll stay on this subject for just a bit longer here. I see some other questions have come in. One of the other things you can do is we like to think about the pool of lineups that we are creating for a contest as the pool of, right out of the gate, viable lineups that you can play and be successful in that contest, right? So we have 20, but we've built 500. Another way you can do this is to kind of just look at whether the builder thinks it's viable to play that, to fade that game, right? So it really wants to use pieces of Washington and New York, but let's say that game had terrible weather again, and we want to just experiment with removing them. Let's just try it. So let's remove stacks from both Washington and New York. And let's also just remove all the batters from that game. So let's get rid of these. And we'll get rid of these guys too. Oh, that's the Yankees. That's fine. Whatever. I'll just let that player go. Okay, so now all Mets and Washington hitters are gone. Oh, one more. Okay, so you can see we had a lot of them, right? Like the builder clearly wanted to use these hitters. Do we have any pitchers? We can even do this with pitchers. No, we don't have any of those pitchers. Okay, so that was fine, right? Of our pool of 500 viable lineups that the builder said are playable in the contest, we were able to remove all of the Washington and New York Mets batters with really no issues, right? And we're still using a set of 20 of our 500 that the builder thinks is viable. What would be the opposite indicator to me in this case is if you got the message saying we need to build more lineups, right? In effect, what the builder is saying to you is, okay, the first 500 lineups we want to use for this contest, you've eliminated too many of them by setting max exposures that we need to build more. And you are expanding past the first 500 or so viable lineups to build more lineups. To me, that would be an indication that, okay, this game is a really good spot and this is a difficult one to fade. And I maybe instead want to limit one-offs or pay very close attention into lock or so on, because I don't want to sacrifice potential EV and play suboptimal lineups that aren't in my build. We can actually even do this for the example for tonight, right? Minnesota White Sox. We wanted to play. I feel like we got a lot more Kenta Maeda the first time I ran this. Did we not? I feel like there was like 30% or something like that originally, but like, wasn't Giolito in here? It seems like my exposure's changed. I wonder if maybe the Sims updated and I refreshed or something like that. But you can do it with pitchers too, right? Let's say the Chicago Milwaukee game had weather concerns and you're getting 100% Peralta and it's like, oh man, what am I going to do with this game? You can experiment just what happens when I exit out. Okay, well, we pivot pretty dramatically. We get a whole bunch of new pitchers in the pool, but these are still lineups that are in the top 500. We haven't sacrificed a ton via Saber score. We're still playing lineups that are 95, 90 plus Saber score lineups. We're probably still playing lineups that can win, and we've crossed a game that maybe potentially is going to have weather concerns there off our list, right? Without any issues. So again, I ended up talking about this quite a bit. This is probably as long as the first time I talked about it now. Those are kind of just my strategies. Again, it's not really like a crystal ball about what teams are going to do. Again, I think Kevin Roth always jokes about on his Twitter that his job is not predicting the weather. It's predicting what baseball teams are going to do in response to the weather. It's very hard. It's difficult to be accurate. I would say like three big takeaways here when you're thinking about weather games is take advantage of late swap and listen to indicators to get it as accurate as possible. Indicators being what the teams are saying on social media, what updated weather reports look like, is the tarp out, that kind of thing. Two is using the builder itself to kind of ask SaberSim, can we fade this game? Is this game fadeable? And if it lets you do that, just fine. Great. If you get a message saying you need to build more lineups, maybe you need to keep some of those teams in. And then third, if you're going to play games that have weather concerns, to capitalize on the upside potential of your lineups with those weather concerns by using them in big 5 stacks and limiting your use of those players as one-offs where they maybe are not necessary and then just really have the potential to ruin the lineup. So that is my like full approach, I guess, to weather in baseball. And it drives me crazy. I was just thinking on Sunday or whatever it was when we had those two weather concerns. I had to set lineups for lock and then was taken off to grab a couple beers with a buddy. And I was like, man, there's nothing more annoying than dealing with weather in DFS. Maybe second only to NBA late scratches and things like that, which is completely non-predictable. At least we have a chance at predicting this. But it's pretty annoying. But I think there's opportunities there. To find some edge too, because the field is not well prepared to deal with weather in my experience. So